Chilean politicians agree on a constitutional referendum after weeks of protests. Ecuadorian social movements are marching against the incarceration of social leaders on terrorism charges. And Israel threatens Palestinians as relative calm returns to Gaza. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla González in Quito, and this is from the South. We begin in Chile, where after 4 weeks of protests against the neoliberal government of President Sebastián Piñera, the main parties on the left and the right have signed an agreement on a referendum to change the constitution. A plebiscite has been approved for April 2020 and will ask citizens whether they want a new constitution and what level of involvement parliamentarians should have in the process. The call for a constituent assembly to change the constitution, which was written in the era of the dictator Augusto Pinochet, has been one of the key demands of the Chilean people, who have been mobilizing against inequality and repression for 29 days.
The political sectors that are present here are in agreement that for the first time Chileans are going to have a democratic constitution. And that's not coincidence. It's not simple the fact that we are here. It's necessity stemming from our mobilizer society. This is the result of a people that have protested and obliged politicians to reach an agreement, because the political system that didn't listen to the people was unsustainable.
And millions of people have been protesting in the country to demand reforms and an overhaul of the constitution, and have been met with heavy police repression. More than 26,000 people have been detained since the demonstrations began, according to figures from Chile's Supreme Court. Our correspondent in Santiago, Leonel Retamal, has the details on this new referendum.
It seems this agreement satisfies both sides and is a direct response to the protests against the government. Protesters in Chile had demanded a plebiscite to begin drafting a new constitution and the creation of a constituent assembly with elected members. This is a historic process in Chile, and for the first time, the people will participate in drafting a new constitution. Still, there are some sectors of society who are not satisfied because they have reservations about the details of the process, their political participation, and the role of social movements. It also seems that the protests won't end here. Social movements and protesters on the streets have become a political actor, and they are not likely to abandon their presence on the streets, where they have been for the last 4 weeks. Other questions remain, such as the accusations of human rights abuses, including rape and sexual abuse against women, and hundreds of people who lost their sight, with thousands more injured. The constituent process is expected to begin in the next 5 months, starting in April 2020, when Chileans will vote on whether they want a new constitution. In October, they will choose members of that constituent assembly to carry through the process, which could be ending in June or July 2021. Then a second plebiscite will take place to approve the text of the constitution drawn up.
That was Leonel Retamal from Santiago. The 8th special meeting of the Political Council of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America, held in Nicaragua, has released a statement on the coup in Bolivia. The declaration reaffirms the ALBA country's commitment to Latin American and Caribbean unity and the region's right to defend its sovereignty. It categorically condemned the coup d'etat against President Evo Morales in Bolivia and the persecution of members of his government and their families. It also rejected the self-proclamation of a new president in breach of constitutional order. The statement also condemns the United States for its role in supporting the coup, while praising the Mexican government of Andrés Manuel López Obrador for offering President Morales asylum on humanitarian grounds. And during this meeting, Bolivian Foreign Minister Diego Pari made it clear how the coup was being planned weeks before the elections on October 20th.
Bolivian opposition, accompanied by civic leaders, police and armed forces, carried out a series of violent actions in recent weeks, which led to the forced resignation of President Evo Morales. With the passing of the days, we could see that the issue of electoral fraud and a second round, new elections, were just pretexts to lead towards a coup d'etat which should be prepared before the elections and was part of the agenda of the Bolivian far right. On the 4th of October, the right had already announced the possibility of fraud in elections on the 20th.
On Thursday, the Senate of Bolivia sworn in Mónica Eva Copa from the Movement Towards Socialism Party as its new president in the midst of the coup d'etat.
We are living a difficult time, but we are going to be able to cope with it all. We must rid ourselves of radical positions. What our country is looking for right now is peace. I am in black because of my more fallen brothers in the Alto, for my fallen brothers in different places. The movement towards socialism does not want more death. We want peace. We want to work in democracy. We want to give the most immediate response to our country by going to a healthy choice, healthy and as fast as possible. And for them, I call on our brothers from the opposition, and if we have to stay day and night here, we will. Brothers, sisters, especially the people of El Alto, we are going to do this like this.
And the outrage against the coup in Bolivia's indigenous and poor communities has become much more organized. The Mass Party spokesperson Gualberto Arispe said the party is calling for constant mobilizations and holds the army and police, aligned with the right wing and coup leaders responsible for the deaths so far.
In the name of the movement towards socialism, political instrument for the sovereignty of the peoples, we are calling for permanent mobilizations, with peaceful marches and roadblocks across Bolivian territory. We reject the civic, police and military coup d'etat. We condemn the unconstitutional self-declaration of Jeanine Áñez as president. As such, any action that she realizes is totally invalid. We are also calling for the incarceration of Generals Calimán and Calderón for violating the political constitution of the state and taking a political side. We hold the armed forces, the police, Luis Fernando Camacho, Carlos Mesa, and their criminal orders responsible for the deaths and injuries sustained until now.
For the fourth day running, a huge march is on its way from El Alto to La Paz to protest against the coup and demand the restoration of democracy in Bolivia. Our correspondent, Freddy Morales, is there.
Hay gente que está viniendo de los 18 distritos.
We're in El Alto, and from here, a march is heading down to the center of La Paz. There are really a lot of people marching. Apart from this column that you can see, which itself is quite big, there are several other columns further ahead, closer to the city of La Paz. We're told that there are two other columns on their way, one from the Public University of El Alto and another from Desancata, which is where the state oil company has a plant. All the streets around that plant are blocked, which is why for the last 24 hours there has been no gasoline or diesel available in La Paz or El Alto. One of the new features of today's march into La Paz is the participation of a big contingent of miners who have arrived from the state mine at Corocoro. This is the first time in the last 4 days of protest against the coup that a group of miners from the interior of the Department of La Paz has taken part. As you know, the miners are a powerful force in Bolivia, and they sometimes carry dynamite on their protests. You can see also the red ponchos, who we've seen before during these protests. These are Aymara campesinos and women from the 20 provinces of the La Paz department. And of course, there are protesters here from the 18 districts in the city of El Alto, the most populated urban area in Bolivia, with more than 1 million inhabitants. They are all expressing their opposition to the political events of the last few days, which they say violate the constitution. They say they want to protect democracy in Bolivia, and that's why this is the fourth day of such protests.
After this break, we will take a look at the workers' strike at the South African Airways. So stay with us.
a review of the world news that investigates, incites analysis, and induces criticism, because every event has a context.
Pusimos el punto en I.
Dot in the I. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. More news at this hour. Social organizations in Ecuador are demanding that the government release those detained for participating in October's anti-austerity protests. Many indigenous leaders, members of workers' unions, and students were arrested and accused of terrorism for their role in nationwide protests against President Lenín Moreno and his government's neoliberal economic measures, sparked by a huge hike in fuel prices. A new court hearing is taking place in the country's capital, Quito, where the Attorney General will change the accusations leveled against several of them after finding no evidence of crimes. Meanwhile, the Interior Minister admitted the police used expired tear gas to disperse anti-austerity protesters in October. This sparked outrage during the weeks of demonstrations. Maria Paula Romo said they were in the midst of an emergency and had to use what they had at hand, and that they weren't as harmful as protesters suggested. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has more.
Good morning. An Ecuadorian court today will discuss the burning of the Comptroller's office during the protests against the latest economic measures announced by President Lenín Moreno. The Office of the Prosecutor of Ecuador informed that the reconstruction of the burning of the Comptroller General of the nation was completed, and within the framework of the fiscal extraction against adolescents in Quito for the alleged crime of terrorism. In this context, the authorities said that indigenous people were involved in these crimes. So today, the CONAIE have rejected this allegation, and they said that this is a political persecution against the main leaders, and they said also they will continue with this fight to prove their innocence.
That was a correspondent, Denise Herrera, in Quito. In other news, an Argentine prosecutor has called for an investigation into President Mauricio Macri's conduct with regard to the Malvinas Islands, disputed territory with the UK. President Macri, along with 4 other current and former ministers, is being accused of actions that could harm Argentine sovereignty. Prosecutor Jorge Di Lello said that a planned flight route from Brazil to the Malvinas Islands risks irreversible consequences to Argentina's international rights. He added that an investigation should also focus on the Foradori-Duncan agreement between the United Kingdom and Argentina, which facilitated British exploitation of natural resources in the area. He said the president can't implement the agreement without the approval of Congress. Cuba has unveiled a memorial for late South African President Nelson Mandela to mark the historic ties between the two countries. Mandela famously praised the Cuban Revolution as an inspiration to all freedom-loving people and was a strong supporter of the late leader Fidel Castro. As president of Cuba, Castro gave the African National Congress military support in the 1960s. And in the 70s and in the 80s, Cuba sent soldiers to fight in Angola, which weakened the government of South Africa and helped Mandela's anti-apartheid fight. After his release from prison, Mandela traveled to Cuba in 1991, saying the writings of the revolutionary leader Ernesto Che Guevara served as an inspiration to him throughout his 20 years of imprisonment.
Always, the South African people are very grateful to Cuba for all that Cuba does for us. And what's important to us is that at this park, which is the park of the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity, South Africa has got two leaders. It's the leader Nelson Mandela that we unveiled his bust today, but we also have the bust of Oliver Tambo, the president of the ANC throughout the time when Nelson Mandela was in prison. So we are very grateful to the Cuban people for opening this park for us and asking again to unveil the bust of Nelson Mandela today. So thank you very much.
To other news now, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean has downgraded its projections for economic growth in the region. It's forecasting an average expansion of 0.1% for 2019. Meanwhile, in 2020, the agency projects that the region will continue along a path of low growth, with a 1.4% estimated growth in GDP. This would mean Latin America and the Caribbean will have had 7 years of low growth, which in turn has translated into worsening levels of average per capita income. The reduction in the pace of growth is affecting the majority of Latin American economies, 17 out of 20 countries. To African news now, where a strike by more than 3,000 workers has brought South African Airways to its knees, with more than 200 flights grounded across the world. Workers downed their tools on Friday and in the morning after the airline refused to accept their demands for an 8% pay rise and a halt to the planned retrenchment of almost 1,000 workers. Management claims those are necessary to save the financially crippled airline. However, workers insist that they will not accept to carry the burden of a crisis that has been caused, according to them, by management's incompetence and corruption.
Where we find ourselves is not the workers' problem. It's management and the board's problem. So why must we pay the brunt? And to say you have no money, you put us in that position.
Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta has held bilateral talks with his Somalian counterpart Mohamed Farmajo as part of efforts by the two neighbors to mend their strained relations. During a meeting held in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, the two leaders agreed to restore bilateral ties between their countries. Speaking to journalists after the meeting, Kenyatta said flights between Nairobi and the Somalian capital, Mogadishu, will resume immediately.
I think secondly, we have also discussed the issues about flights from Mogadishu into Nairobi, because now apparently they're going through Wajir. And we have agreed that within a week, the necessary authorities should put in place that which is necessary to ensure that we now have direct flights once again from Mogadishu to Nairobi. On all the other issues we have agreed, as brothers will do, we will sit and continue our discussions, and we find solutions that are beneficial to both our countries, to both our peoples, and that will encourage and develop and grow the prosperity of our people.
Nigeria, Benin, and Niger have agreed to set up a joint border patrol force to tackle smuggling in West Africa. Nigeria launched a partial border closure in August to tackle smuggling of rice and other goods. And last month, it confirmed that all trade via land borders had been halted indefinitely. The three ministers of those countries agreed that a joint border patrol team comprising of naval, customs, immigration and security officials would meet later in the month to promote intra-regional trade.
The delegation of Benin and Niger appealed for the immediate reopening of the Nigerian borders. In conclusion, the three countries reaffirmed their commitment in enhancing economic integration.
Still to come, we get the latest on a new Syrian government offensive against terrorists in Idlib. Don't go away.
Innovation, science, the technological breakthrough, and its influence in society.
Viajeros del saber, el futuro está aquí.
Atomen. Monday, only on Telesur.
Thank you for joining us again. Let's continue. As relative calm returns to Gaza, Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz is warning that his country will continue with targeted assassinations of Palestinians. According to local media reports, Katz told Israel Army Radio that Tel Aviv has no intention of changing its military policy despite signing an Egyptian brokered truce with Gaza's based Islamic struggle movement. The assassination of a senior Islamic struggle movement on Tuesday caused the recent wave of violence that resulted in 34 Palestinians dying in Israeli raids on the occupied Gaza Strip. Our correspondent, Lianet Cruz, has more on this.
La situación permanece volátil en la franja de Gaza a pesar de la...
The situation remains volatile in Gaza Strip after the ceasefire and peace agreement that was reached by Palestinian Islamic Jihad group and the Israeli army. This agreement, which was made at 5:30 a.m. on Thursday, says that Palestinian groups must ensure a return to normality and maintain calm during demonstration on the Great March of Return that take place every week, while Israel must stop shooting at defenseless Palestinians and stop target killings. This latter is a very controversial point since it was made condition for an end of hostility and laid down by the Islamic Jihad. However, Israel's high military command have denied it they accept this condition, since they consider that target assassinations are an effective strategy that they will continue to implement. Within this context, the Palestinian Center for Human Rights have launched an investigation in Gaza on the extermination of an entire Palestinian family by Israel forces. Other Palestinian cities have shown solidarity with the residents of Gaza, who have suffered weekly attacks from the Israel side. In fact, there were 30 Palestinian youth who suffocated after breathing tear gas that was released by Israeli soldiers, according to the Red Crescent of Palestine.
That was our correspondent, Lianet Cruz. Hong Kong police have warned protesters that they are moving one step closer to terrorism by sinking the city into chaos. On Thursday night, protesters set a toll booth on fire at a cross-harbor tunnel, paralyzing parts of the city for a fourth consecutive day. Over the past days, protesters have torched vehicles and buildings, hurled petrol bombs at police stations and trains, and vandalized a number of shopping malls and university campuses. And China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs has accused the British government of covertly fueling the opposition protests in Hong Kong.
If the British side does not change its wrong practices and continues to add fuel to the fire, sow discord, and instigate others, then it will bring countercharges and calamity on itself. At the same time, we urge the British side to speak and act cautiously on Hong Kong issues and not send out false signals, sow discord and instigate others, intervene in Hong Kong affairs or interfere in China's internal affairs anymore.
Police in Hong Kong has opened a murder investigation after a man was killed during the increasingly violent opposition protests. The 70-year-old man died after being hit by a brick hurled by a protester when he attempted to clear up barricades set up by protesters. City authorities have sent condolences to the man's family and vowed to bring the perpetrators to justice. On Monday, opposition supporters set a 57-year-old man on fire after dousing him with a flammable liquid.
During his lunch break, he was shooting video of his surroundings with his phone. However, someone hit his forehead with a brick. Unfortunately, the cleaner passed away last night.
We express condolences to the family of the deceased and will investigate into the case in depth. It's now classified as murder and under investigation by the New Territories North Regional Crime Unit.
And we finish in Syria, where a government military operation against terrorists in the province of Idlib has resumed. Hisham Wanous has more on this.
Hello and greetings to all Telesur viewers. The Syrian Arab Army has effectively resumed military operation against al-Nusra terrorists in the northwestern province of Idlib, hoping for the total liberation of this region considered to be the last extremist stronghold in Syrian territory. After 8 raids and artillery bombing by Syrian and Russian forces, the Syrian army collided with al-Nusra terrorists and with the Turkestan Party, inflicting great losses to the extremists and regaining control of Al-Ubida and Tal Asna in the southeast of Idlib. This latest operation takes place 2 days after President Bashar al-Assad said it was coming. The Arab Syrian army is giving time for the departure of civilians to prevent their death. To this end, 2 humanitarian corridors were established in coordination with Russian forces for evacuations. However, terrorists attacked these humanitarian corridors with mortar shells to prevent civilians from leaving and to continue to use them as human shields. Operations to liberate Idlib began last August and were stopped last September after reaching an agreement between Russia and Turkey, as Ankara pledged to disband the al-Nusra terrorist group in Idlib and in the nearby province of Hama, Aleppo and Latakia. The Syrian Arab Army has also managed to deploy to the border with Turkey in compliance with the agreement reached between Russia and Turkey in Sochi to stop Turkish military operation against Kurdish militia, who Ankara qualifies as terrorists and say endanger their national security.
That was a correspondent, Hisham Wanous, and with that we end our news brief. But remember, you can find all of our stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And for our viewers in Africa, you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and 539 in Nigeria. And be sure to also join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on